Welcome back to Indiana at the Voice of College Football. And we got a very special show tonight with special guest Mark Rogers, the host of the Voice of College Football. It's cannot wait to talk about Indiana tonight because it's been a fantastic season. And there's no one else better to talk to about Indiana football than Mark Rogers. I know he doesn't talk about Indiana that much, but he is the voice of college football, and he knows they've had a fantastic season. Indiana's been beaten down by everybody. They haven't played anybody. They're no good. You know, they don't deserve to be in the playoffs, but none of that matters because they are, in fact, in the college football playoff to face Notre Dame. I mean, that is just an epic game right there. Battle for Indiana. Purdue's not a part of it this year. They're terrible, even if maybe they're getting their team, program back together for next season. We'll have to see what Barry Odom can do. But this year they were a disaster. So it's coming down to Indiana and Notre Dame, two teams that don't normally face each other and two teams that couldn't be further from the spectrum of each other when it comes to college football pedigree. Indiana, the losingest power conference program ever, and Notre Dame, one of the winningest. So it's all going to meet up, in about a week and a half. Friday night. You can't get any better than that. I only wish that it was in Memorial Stadium instead of Notre Dame Stadium. But, it is what it is on that. But appreciate you for coming on, Mark. And what are your early thoughts?
Well, yeah, they were only a couple seeding rankings away from getting that home spot. But, yeah, the schedule definitely hurt them in that regard. So they've been sitting in that 10 spot forever and really couldn't do much to boost that. So the schedule in the Big Ten didn't do them any favors. But yeah, I think this is going to be a competitive game. I got to think that Notre Dame's something like a 7 or 8 point favorite, something in that range. And that seems pretty reasonable to me. I generally guessed within a point or two the point spreads of all these first round playoff games, although the Ohio State point spread, I got to say, is a little bit higher than I thought it might be. But yeah, I don't think that Indiana is overmatched in this game whatsoever. I think that they'll put up a good fight. I haven't made a prediction. I don't know if I want to make a prediction here because it may not be too favorable, but I do think that it's going to be a good ball game. I don't see them getting trampled by any stretch of the imagination, but they've had a remarkable season, and maybe Curt Cignetti is making them just believe that they're a little bit better than they actually are.
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, they've played a lot better than the sum of their parts, or however the phrase would go, because they don't have any 5-star players. They don't have guys that really anybody wanted. I mean, maybe 2 players on their team, maybe 3, would have been considered by other power conference programs. So most of these guys, it was just Indiana. Maybe you would have a Virginia Tech or something, or Virginia on there, but it was basically if they didn't go to IU, they weren't going anywhere in the power conference, none of these guys. And they've been able to churn out this season. And I know the schedule. I understand that it hasn't been that hard. But if Tom Allen was still the coach of this team, even with these players, they would not have these players, obviously, if Tom Allen was still the coach. But I look at this team, and even if Tom Allen was coaching it, they're not 11-1. They're not even probably 8-4. I mean, it's not happening. Because in Tom Allen's defense, they always had harder schedules. And that's why they never really had great records outside the 2 decent seasons. And even the 2019 season, their schedule was pretty easy. 2020 was a fluky year. But, nobody's doing this at Indiana, even with this schedule, with this team. I just don't see it. And that's why what he's done is so impressive. I said they were going to go 7-5 this year. That was my preseason prediction for Indiana. It was 7-5. And I thought I was too bullish. And I've mentioned it a ton this year because I was wrong. For the first time in my life, I undersold Indiana. I've always oversold IU. They're going to go 6-6 this year, 4-8. Oh, they're going to go 6-6 this year, 3-9. And then I say this year 7-5, and they go 11-1. I still can't believe it.
Yeah, I got to say that you mentioned your 7-5 pick a few times on my show, and I just gave you a wink and go get them. Good luck. But I think I picked them maybe 5-7,
Mm-hmm.
something in that range, which would have been 2-7 in the Big Ten,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 3-6 in the Big Ten with the 3 wins uh, outside the conference. But I certainly didn't pick them anywhere above 6-6 was my record at most. So it's been remarkable. And Curtis Rourke was a quarterback addition that I agreed with, that I thought was a good pickup, that I thought would do a nice job. But 27 touchdowns and 4 picks. I didn't anticipate him taking care of the ball that well and carving up defenses in this conference. And, that's even with missing some time when he was banged up. And I was hoping at that point of the season that this Indiana train wouldn't come to a screeching halt, because he had to miss the, he got knocked out against Nebraska and then wasn't able to play against Washington. And that at that point, the way the Huskies were playing looked like a dangerous team to be coming to Indiana. And that looked like this could be a upset spot here, but obviously Taven Jackson filled in admirably and they just kept rolling, and that was not that close of a game. And so, yeah, the Curtis Rourke edition just has been remarkable. And again, Kurt Cignetti, the phrase is sometimes you have to love him. Well, I'm not going to say it like that, because you don't have to love Kurt Cignetti, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that don't. But you got to notice him. You've got to take note of what he's doing. You have to. If you don't respect him as a man, you got to respect him as a head football coach, because this is one of the great coaching jobs in the history of college football, modern college football. This turnaround that he's been able to pull off. We could have been sitting here all off season taking bids on, okay, who's the most likely team to make the college football playoff? Okay, Georgia, and then Ohio State, and we could have been sitting there for 10 or 12 hours scratching our heads, coming up with Arizona State and Indiana to be in the playoff. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, to be honest, that's what makes the 12-team playoff good. I don't like the structure of it, and I still prefer a 4-team playoff. I know a lot of people, Indiana fans would be like, that's insane. We wouldn't be in it right now if it was. And I agree. But the 12-team playoff is very flawed. It's a terrible system. And I know you've talked about it a ton. I've talked about it a ton, how poor it is. Just having the conference champions of weak conferences get those top spots. It's just, it makes no sense. I mean, you got to reward them for, being conference champions. I get that, but those are weaker conferences, like the Big 12 and the ACC are like nowhere on the level of the Big 10 and the SEC anymore. They're not even close. I mean, they're still power conference leagues, but they're not even close to the same strength. But even though I don't like the system, I do think it is great to have, potential for Arizona State and even some of the other teams that were in the conversation, like BYU was there for a long time. Iowa State, Colorado had a chance. SMU got in. That was a whole other debate too with SMU, Alabama. And I can't wait to talk about that with Jackson on Thursday, even though Alabama didn't get in, but like SMU getting in. I mean, all these teams getting in is crazy, because of the fact you would have never seen it before, ever. It doesn't happen. Now, I know that the people are going against it because they're like, well, these games are going to be blowouts. And, I mean, most likely some of them won't be close. But still, they decided to go with 12 teams, and some teams have to get in. It's just the way that it works. Unfortunately, the SEC beat each other up. Like, we know that Ole Miss and Alabama and South Carolina are better football teams than Indiana, SMU, and Arizona State. They're better football teams. They have more talent. They've got, all that kind of stuff. But they lost 3 games. I mean, and a couple of them were to bad teams. I mean, like, to me, Alabama losing by 21 to Oklahoma and Ole Miss losing to Kentucky is why they're not in. I mean, those are bad losses, however you slice it. And SMU, Indiana, and Arizona State obviously won their conference, but Indiana and SMU didn't have a bad loss, and that's why they were able to sneak in, whether they deserve to be in or not. Indiana, they had no case not to be out, but SMU definitely did. But
yeah, I think the committee did what they needed to do, combining game evaluation, talent evaluation, with more so which teams earned the spots under the system.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly once we got to the last weekend and SMU was already ranked number 8 in the country,
Mm-hmm.
there's just no conceivable way to drop them 4 spots and out of it. So I think the committee, for as much as I've railed on them in the past, pretty much made the moves that needed to be made. Yeah, I would have a different 12 if you're just asking me the 12 best teams in the country, which nobody knows. That's just an estimation. You know, anybody who tells you that they know who the 12 best teams in the country, yeah, just don't listen any longer to that person, because we don't know who the 12 best teams are. But yeah, based on talent evaluation, based on the wins that Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina posted and all of that, I believe that they're better teams than SMU and Indiana. But I think the sport is better for allowing some room for getting the teams that won the games, regardless of the schedule, into the system, rather than just loading up on SEC and Big Ten teams and just flooding the field with nothing but that.
Absolutely. And Nick Saban made a good point too, because he was like, well, if SMU, wasn't going to get in, like they didn't deserve to be in or whatever, then they should have never been ranked 8th to begin with. Like if they were ranked like 12th and then lost to Clemson, then they're done. It would have been like the Big 12 championship where win and you're in kind of deal. But they didn't do that. They had SMU ranked 8th. So since they barely lost, you just can't drop them more than 3 spots. They kind of put themselves in that situation where they had to put them in. Because, I mean, they've done well all season, and both their losses were by 3 points. It's kind of like that argument previously with Alabama when they had those 2 close losses at Tennessee and at LSU. People said they should have been in because they both lost those games by close amounts. But that's a 14 playoff. Now you're dealing with a 12-team playoff with a 2-loss team and a 3-loss team. That's why expanding the playoff, no matter how much you expand it to, even if it's 16-24, there's always going to be people complaining about that next team. I mean, if you expand it to 24, then you're going to be complaining about a 3-loss Miami or a 4-loss A&M, or stuff like that. It's not going to change anything. People are still going to debate it. So, unfortunately, there's just no perfect way to do it. Like, no matter who you put in, there's going to be people complaining about it. I agree, because I said this the day before. I agreed that SMU should have been in over Alabama, even though I said Bama's objectively the better team and all that kind of stuff. I said SMU should be in based off where the committee had them and the conference championships. You can't negate that completely, because then people are going to want to opt out of those things. And I think it would have been really interesting if Penn State had a loss to Maryland. Indiana would have gotten the Big Ten championship game. That scenario, I wanted to see that in a way, but I also didn't, because I didn't want any shot of IU not getting in. But if Indiana loses to Oregon by like 17 in the Big Ten championship game, do they still get in, or do you think they fall out? That would be insane that SMU would get in, but Indiana wouldn't.
Yeah, and that's where I guess the situation culminated in a way in which we got to take the committee at its word, even though we didn't really get to see them have to prove it. But they said that the conference championship games would not count against these teams. And they didn't really have to back that up. Now, because SMU played a close enough game. If SMU loses that game 42-10, what does the committee do with that game? I don't know. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen Indiana play in the Big Ten championship game against Oregon, just to play another really top-notch team and give them one more shot just to see what they would do. But, I don't think that Penn State, and this is one knock I've got on the committee, that I don't think the Penn State, Ohio State ranking comparison makes any sense whatsoever. But I could argue that easily in terms of the head-to-head in the Oregon game, and then also Ohio State beating Indiana. But they obviously did not take into account Penn State's championship game there. And really with Texas, you can't tell because they would have been ranked 5th before the SEC championship game. Like if you knew they're losing the SEC championship game, they're going to be a non-champion. Well, they would have been the 5th seed. And then they play an overtime game. And did they really lose anything there? No. So, yeah, I guess the conference championship games, we don't know what the committee thought of those because they didn't really have to make a move based on somebody looking amazing or somebody more likely looking horrendous. They didn't have to deal with that.
Absolutely. I think a big thing that didn't make sense to me is I saw someone post online that said that Indiana could lose to 20 to 25 teams in college football or whatever. 20 to 25 teams could beat Indiana is how they worded it. And I'm like, isn't that like every team though? I mean, we've seen a lot of upsets this year. Georgia beat Kentucky by 1 point. 1. Ole Miss lost to them. Bama lost to Vandy. I mean, Oregon, who everybody's like, they're great, right? Well, they beat Wisconsin by 3. Penn State beat Minnesota by 1. I don't understand that logic. Texas barely beat Vanderbilt. There's not one team this year. Even Ohio State barely beat Nebraska. Every team's done it. Every single team is done. So why is it because Indiana, not having as much talent, not being a brand, someone's going to say that, but then no one's going to look at Texas and Georgia and all these other teams that have had close calls against really bad teams. I don't get that. That's just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, if that person is actually making that statement and that's the statement that like if what they truly mean is that there are 20 or 25 teams better than Indiana, well, then that's a different statement than just flat out saying that 20 or 25 teams could beat Indiana.
Absolutely, they could beat them.
To your point, yes. How good is and maybe I shouldn't even take Michigan, Ohio State. Maybe that's just a different deal. I don't know. But if you're taking that as just another game, Michigan's what, the 40th best team in the country? What they beat, the 3rd or 4th best team in the country. There you go. We could go on and on for hours about where I generally think once we get to about the 7th or 8th, 9th best team in the country, that it starts to, they're better than the 30th team, but not much. It starts to really compact between about 12 and 30, 35.
Like there's barely any difference between like Texas A&M and South Carolina or A&M and Ole Miss or even LSU. You can almost throw them. The difference between the teams is marginal. Like there's no difference. People just look at them differently because of where they finished. Like, oh, you went 9-3, LSU went 7-5. Is there that much difference? I mean, not really. There's just not that much difference. I mean, like we saw Alabama lose to Oklahoma by 21, but then LSU beat Oklahoma by 20, and LSU lost to Bama by 36. That's college football. That's college football. I mean, yes, who's better? Bama's better than LSU, I would say, and LSU is better than Oklahoma, but the results didn't match. That's college football. We play the games for a reason. The favorite team doesn't always win. I mean, that Indiana, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan complex is nuts. I mean, Michigan beat Ohio State, Indiana beat Michigan, but Indiana loses to Ohio State by 23. Like, who's the better team? I would say Ohio State by far is the best team. And then between Michigan and Indiana, it's pretty close. I mean, Michigan has more talent, but they didn't have a quarterback. I mean, they threw for 62 yards against Ohio State, 62 yards. I mean, they threw for more against Indiana. Indiana won barely. But, I mean, there's not a big difference. A lot of fans, I think, get confused with that because they're just looking at record, but there's not a lot of difference.
In my judgment, that's why you got to take the complete resume and evaluate the entire resume of 12 games rather than we can run in circles all night talking about they beat them, but they beat them and all of that business based on one game.
Absolutely. And it's so fun to do because you could do it for hours on end, but it's just the way that it goes. People are going to debate what they're going to debate. It's what makes college football so special. That's why we're here talking about it. It's awesome. The discussion, debate, and analysis, your go-to phrase for the voice of college football. That's why we do it. It's tons of fun. And we got Jackson with a $2 super chat. Appreciate that. Jackson says Indiana beats Notre Dame. Will be the first time since 1950. I mean, to be fair with Indiana, they don't play Notre Dame that much. But at the same time, most years Indiana would have gotten blown out by Notre Dame anyway. So it would be very impressive for Indiana to do that. I appreciate that. And we got also $5 super chat from Jackson. If IU beats Notre Dame South Bend, will be the first time since 1901. Yeah, okay, that was a long time ago. Funny thing enough, that like Indiana actually started out as a decent college football program, all things considered, and then they didn't get Newt Rockne. They could have hired Newt Rockne, but he goes to Notre Dame, and the rest is history. Indiana ends up being terrible forever. So until now, it's wild.
This Crying Belly is telling us that Indiana is 23-5 all time against Notre Dame. Is that true?
There is no way. Okay, I don't know that. I do not know that.
I'm going to Winsipedia right this second.
If you weren't, I was, because I know a lot about IU football, but I don't know that. I would not think that's true.
Yeah, if this was Indiana Clemson, let's say, and we knew that they played back in the 20s, then I would say, okay, maybe that's possible. But Notre Dame has never been down during a time in which Indiana would have been playing them a long time ago, that I could imagine for 28 games, 29 games with a tie, that would have held up. I just don't see.
There's no way.
Here we go. We've got
Notre Dame 23 wins, Indiana 5.
Way around.
Yeah. Okay. I was about to say, like, there's no way. Like, I know Indiana does have the series lead over Kentucky. I know that. It's by one game. Indiana 17, Kentucky 16, and one tie. So Indiana does lead Kentucky in football. But there's no way it's Notre Dame. Like, there's just no way. That's crazy.
Yes, Indiana last won in 1950, like Jackson told us, 20-7 in Bloomington against Frank Leahy. And,
I think Bo McMillan was still there, the coach. I think his name was Bo McMillan back in the 40s, and then he left for the NFL.
Clyde Smith in 1950.
For Indiana?
Yes.
Okay, that was after McMillan. I know McMillan, he was the coach at the 45 Rose Bowl. I know that. I know he left a few years later for the NFL. Might have been the 49 season then. But, yeah, Will's saying that was Frank's worst team right after Leon Hart left. So.
And the last time they got together was 1991. Notre Dame won in South Bend 49-27, Bill Mallory's team against Lou Holtz.
Funny thing about that, there is some special news on the television front, though. That Notre Dame game in 91, I did see someone post that was the first NBC game for Notre Dame. Notre Dame, Indiana, 91. And now this is the first ABC game for Notre Dame facing Indiana now. That's weird. First NBC game, it was in 91, and now it's first ABC game now. I saw something.
What do you mean? Whoa. The first ABC game for Notre Dame.
Yeah, ABC. That's what I meant. ABC. Yeah.
I know you said ABC. Notre Dame's played a zillion games on ABC.
So someone posted something like that. Maybe they worded it differently.
They apparently don't know what they're
I think it could be home game. No. I think that's it. I think it's the first Notre Dame home game on ABC. Sorry, that's it. Sorry.
I'll have to double check on that. I don't believe that's even the case.
Will says first ABC home game since the 80s.
Since the 80s. Yes.
Because someone posted something like that. Sorry, it wasn't first all time, but since the 80s. Yeah. Okay. It's still crazy, though. It is wild on that.
Watched Notre Dame play many games on ABC. At home. Okay.
Yeah,
Will says 86. Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense because, I mean, they've had that NBC contract and, like, all their home games are on NBC. So that definitely would check out. Do have to, real quick for a bit, talk about the Coach of the Year debate. Since people care a lot. I personally don't care that much because I think that it's obvious who it is. But Curt Cignetti or Kenny Dillingham for Coach of the Year. Kenny Dillingham has been amazing. I mean, unbelievable what he's done. Would never have expected Arizona State to be this good. Funny thing enough is, like, me and Will have been picking, like, for Arizona State all year after like week 6. Like they just kept winning. So we're like, oh, let's back Arizona State. He actually went with Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. I was like, no, we backed Arizona State all year, Will. Let's go Arizona State. Well, they won. So I'm happy for Dillingham. He's done an amazing job. But Curt Cignetti, though, his first year, Dillingham second, worst conference for Dillingham, a little bit tougher schedule. I think Cignetti deserves it because it's his first season and Indiana has been the worst power conference program ever. But I do want to hear your take between the two, Mark, and who you think deserves Coach of the Year. And if it's a close margin on who should win it.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to come up with anything striking here, but based on what you just stated, you've got Kenny Dillingham. And anytime a coach has that next season, that's usually the season that they are able to start a breakthrough, would be the second season because they arrived on campus. They didn't get a full recruiting cycle their first time in the door, as Curt Cignetti did not. And then you get into a second season. Well, then you had a full recruiting cycle. You had a full off season to get your players acclimated to coaching staffs, relationships, terminology, all those things. So a second season is usually when a coach breaks through. So to accomplish what Curt Cignetti did year one, it's so significantly more difficult to do. And I'm not necessarily going to compare the rosters or the programs where they stand right this second or where they stood when each coach took over. But historically, there's no comparison between Indiana and Arizona State football. Arizona State football came that close to winning a national championship in 1996. Arizona State's been competitive for the most part in the Pac-10, then 12. Of course, when they joined, it became the Pac-10 from the Pac-8 with Arizona in 1978. And they've been a fairly major player in the Pac-10 and 12 ever since then. So, yeah, Indiana's been a doormat. There's no comparison between the two programs historically. All sorts of coaches have succeeded at Arizona State at a high level. Frank Kush, Darryl Rogers, Bruce Snyder, and Todd Graham most recently went to a Pac-12 championship game in 2014. So Indiana, what are we doing here? Bill Mallory is the most successful coach in the history of Indiana football, and he's got a losing record.
I know. I've joked that with you so many times. And I still think it's highly ironic that Indiana gets a college football playoff appearance before winning a bowl game. Hasn't won a bowl game since 91, right? And I've joked with that like for years with Indiana. I haven't made a bowl game in 33 years, but they make the playoff first. Okay. Yeah, but Bill Mallory, I mean, we love Bill Mallory. I mean, Indiana fans, I mean, what a guy. You know, what he did for Indiana football was great for Indiana football, but at any other program, it would be garbage. I mean, it would literally be garbage. Imagine Bill Mallory, even at like North Carolina with that record. I mean, he no one would care. I mean, he was like, I think he's like 67 and like 79 and like 4. I mean, he was not even close to having a winning record, but he's the winningest coach by far in Indiana history. No one else came close. McMillan would have, but unfortunately he didn't stay long enough. He was only at Indiana for like 7 years and he won like 50 something games and they played fewer games in the past. He did good, but then he left for the NFL and then he died of like a heart attack 2 years later anyway. So even if he stayed in Indiana, he might not even have been there long. So that's unfortunate, but he was really good. Probably the best coach they ever had. But considering the fact that football had changed so much from the 40s to the 80s and 90s, Mallory is the best coach in history because he, you know, going up against stiffer, you know, competition, like more money's being put into football. There's still no NIL and any of that junk or none of that. But Indiana was way behind. I think Mallory did good. But yeah, I mean, even Lee Corso, people think fondly of him, and his record was really bad. he did win the first bowl game for IU though, so he still has that.
Yeah, I'm looking at Bill Mallory here. He went 69 and 77.
I was close. I switched him. I said 67, 79, 69, 77. Okay.
69, 77. They were in he was there from 1984 through 96. So that's 13 seasons in the Big Ten. He had 4 winning records in 13 years in the Big Ten. He went 39-65 in the Big Ten. And there's your most successful coach. He finished in the top 20. It was the top 20 at the time twice. I guess you could say twice. One was just in the coaches poll. Yeah, he won a bowl game, won 2 bowl games.
One against Baylor. I know they beat Baylor.
Baylor in the Copper Bowl. Yeah, I do remember that game. And the other one in the Liberty, that would have been against, I thought that was against an SEC team. That might have been
Carolina. I think it was South Carolina.
I was going to guess Florida.
I think they beat South Carolina, if I recall, in 88. I know they won in 88.
Yeah, 34-10. You're right. 34-10 against South Carolina. Yeah, I'm sure I watched that game at the time, but don't remember.
Anthony Thompson was good. I don't know if you remember Anthony Thompson.
Oh, yeah.
Anthony Thompson and Vaughn Dunbar were the 2 really good backs those few seasons. And then they had Trent Green at QB. Like, that was their team. I mean, but none of them really had successful NFL careers. I mean, Trent Green kind of, I guess, but like Vaughn Dunbar, Anthony Thompson did not, even though Anthony Thompson was insanely good. I don't know what happened. I don't know if I think he might have got injured, but he was really good. I think he finished like 5th in the Heisman voting in 89. But he didn't have any shot to win because of the fact that Indiana wasn't very good. They had a bad record. But his stats, he was like number 1 or number 2 in college football in rushing yards that year. Back then, running backs were more considered for the award versus today, even though Genty has a shot. But, everybody's saying Travis Hunter. And Anthony Thompson was really good. And then the last really great statistical player Indiana had was Anton Randall L. in the 90s and early 2000s, and they didn't win anything. So he had no shot to win anything. But his stats were nuts. He was the first quarterback to put up 20 passing touchdowns and rushing touchdowns in the same season. In football history, no one had ever done it because running quarterbacks weren't in style then. You didn't have like Michael Vick yet. So it was pretty crazy. But yeah, I felt bad for Randall L. because the teams were horrible, like just bad. He went 5-6 in his last season, and he put up like the best stats of any quarterback. He was like Joe Burrow of the NFL this year. Great stats, but terrible team. But yeah, that Indiana's history of football is pathetic, Mark. Like, I've already basically named their entire history. The 45 season, the 67 season, Mallory's 2 bowl wins, Corso's 1 bowl win, and then I guess Randall L. and then, Penix, Nate Sudfeld. We're done. I mean, now Cignetti. That's it. I mean, Ohio State, you could talk for 10 hours, about all the great coaches and players and all that. Will with Notre Dame. All I got is like 5 players, a couple coaches, and a couple bowl wins. That's all I got. But I got, I like Alabama too. So, I mean, I got Alabama's history, but Indiana's
Kevin Wilson there.
Yeah.
They had a nice run of running backs under Kevin Wilson.
Yeah, Tevin Coleman was good. Jordan Howard. I mean, and it was brief. Simi Cobb's most underrated player that never did anything. My goodness, that Ohio State game, and Simi Cobb's is all over the field, and he didn't even do anything in the pros. I was like, what happened? I don't know. He was fantastic. I think he was better than like Freifogel and Westbrook, even though Westbrook's doing good in the NFL. But Simi Cobb's is really good, and he's off the face of the earth. Like, nobody knows what happened to him.
That was crazy. A fun team. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild on that. But, yeah, I mean, Cignetti and Dillingham, I just don't think it's close. I think that, Kurt Cignetti easily, just based off how bad Indiana is, that, he should be Coach of the Year. But definitely, I do want to get your thoughts on this because this was interesting. I saw on Twitter or X, people ranking the 12 playoff coaches. I do want to see if you agree with this list. Kirby Smart at number 1, Dabo at number 2, Steve Sarkisian at 3, Lanning at 4, Ron Day 5, and then James Franklin 6, Heupel 7, Freeman 8, Cignetti 9, Dillingham 10, Rhett Lashley 11, and Spencer Danielson at 12. Ranking the coaches in the playoff. What are your thoughts on that list?
Well, my first thought is, what are we ranking here? Are we ranking their accomplishments and how good they've been from start to finish? That's what that looks like right there. That is basically a ranking of accomplishments. And that's fairly accurate from that standpoint. So if we take it from the top there, I do not believe that the work that Dabo Swinney has done recently would put him in the second position. I would lift Sark above Dabo currently, for as much respect as I have for Dabo Swinney and like Dabo Swinney. If this is not a resume historical ranking, but a now ranking, I'm going Sark and Lanning over Dabo. And I may even lift Josh Heupel above James Franklin. I think I would. And then if we could knock it down after that, what are Kurt Signetti and Kenny Dillingham doing right now with the level of roster talent that they have? I would pop them up a few notches as well. Rhett Lashley at SMU. Again, if we're talking about the job that these guys are doing right now, I don't know. Yeah, Ryan Day's accomplished a lot when you talk about wins and losses, but if you're talking about what he's been given and what most coaches would be able to recruit at Ohio State, then what he's done hasn't been that impressive.
Yeah, because I mean, when I look at this list, and I used to do this with Tom Allen, I would joke with a lot of people. I'd be like, could this coach, win 8 games in Indiana, or all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I'm looking at this list, and how many of these coaches could go 11-1 at Indiana this year with this team? I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if any of them could. We don't know because we'll never be able to witness it. That's the problem. There's no way to be able to say. But I mean, you look at a guy like Marcus Freeman or James Franklin, and like I don't think either of those two, especially Franklin, would win 11 games at Indiana with the talent that Indiana has this year. I know the schedule was easy. I get that. But, I mean, these guys have way more talent, and they still choke games. They still lose games to teams that they shouldn't on a regular basis. And that's the problem. I mean, like you said, Ron Day, I mean, even though I think that the flack that he gets is way overblown, and still do not think that he should be anywhere close to being fired, it's understandable why people are irritated because Ohio State's pedigree, they expect to win championships every year like Bama. I mean, Ohio State's standard is probably higher than any team. I mean, they probably have the highest standard of any team in college football right now, even over Bama, I would say. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but their standard is really high, and he's won like more than anybody could basically win right now at a school. Even basically every year posting better win percentages almost than Kirby, but he's not beating Michigan, and he has all this talent, and it just seems like the product is slowly getting worse. I mean, like you look at CJ Stroud, you look at Justin Fields versus Kyle McCord, Will Howard, it is significantly worse. They just look worse. Still a fantastic team. It can still blow the doors off a good team if they play well like Indiana, but then you have Michigan. And that Nebraska game, you're seeing more of that. But yeah, if you're going off that, Ron Day's really not impressive at all. Any coach could do what Ron Day's doing, basically, almost anybody, unless you're just really bad. But yeah, could any of these coaches do what Signetti or even Dillingham did at their respective schools? Maybe not. That's why, like, if you're going off that, Signetti and Dillingham probably should be higher. But like you said, this list clearly is based off accomplishment, which I'm not saying that's unfair. It's just an easy list to do. It would have been much more interesting to see if they would have gone with what they've done lately or how impressive it was of what they did with their team this season. I don't know how that list would turn out. Signetti still wouldn't be probably number 1, but he'd be a lot higher on the list.
Yeah, it's a much more interesting list if you take the approach that look at each one of those coaches against the expectations of the program, the reasonable expectations of what that program was when they got there and what they're accomplishing. And you could almost, outside of Kirby, and if you're looking at right now, Dabo lifetime achievements extremely high. He may even be number 1. That's where they're kind of mixing accomplishments with current status of the program, because if you're going lifetime achievement, then Dabo's 1 and Kirby's 2. And Ryan Day's probably 3. I forget who else was up there. Ryan Day would be 3, but yeah, Lanning. So Sark and Lanning aren't anywhere close to Ryan Day. So Day would be 3, and then actually James Franklin would be 4. But if you're looking at what has this coach done, number 1, you got to consider, what did they walk into? Well, Kirby Smart was given like a top 10 program by Mark
Mhm.
Richt, and obviously he's made it much better. And you'd have to go down the list. And what was this coach given? Number one. Number two, and especially this rings true with Dabo more than anybody else, his high, which lasted a long time, 5, 6, 7 years, isn't where he is right now.
Mhm.
And I'm not talking about one down year where, oh, they were in elite, they were competing for national championships, and he had, 1 9-3 season. No, this has been going on now for 2021, 2, 3, 4. So for 4 consecutive years, they have underachieved. So if you're looking at the expectations of the program and what the coach inherited and then make that ranking, I think it looks completely different. And Dillingham and Signetti shoot up that list.
Mhm. Absolutely. I agree. I mean, this is very impressive what they've done. I mean, Kenny Dillingham was probably expected in the preseason maybe to win 5 or 6 games, and Signetti was expected by most to win like 4, maybe 5. I even saw some predictions saying 3-9. And I mean, you were on the higher end at 5-7. I mean, honestly, there was so many people saying 4-8 and 3-9, and it was basically just Indiana fans and maybe a couple Big Ten fans that were like, "We'll give them 6-6 or 7-5." I didn't see any predictions higher than that. I mean, there was like one guy. It's so hilarious. He posted online that he predicted Indiana. He bet on Indiana to make the playoff, and he won like $10,000. So he was like bragging about that. I'm like, yeah, that's great, man. But deep down, you didn't think that was going to happen. There's no way. You just
Did he
got very
post
lucky.
a ticket? Did he shoot
I
a
think he
ticket?
did. Yes.
Okay, posted a ticket.
I would show it if I'd have bookmarked it, but I didn't. I didn't bookmark it, but I did see it online that he posted it. He won like 9,500 or $10,000, something like that, on a bet in the preseason before the season started that Indiana would make the playoff. I mean, like that deep down, that guy was just shot in the dark. I don't think that he really, was expecting that to happen, but he was like, I knew it. I knew it was funny. But yeah, it's crazy on Signetti and Dillingham how well they've done, and happy for both, especially happy for Signetti because of I like Indiana, so I'm glad they're doing good. I do want to ask this though before we get off. I do want to ask about Signetti though. It just in the program with Indiana. Are you shocked like that he got the extension and that like he's staying? And are you shocked that like Indiana's paying their assistants an $11 million worth of money to keep all their assistants except one? Like they're losing one guy to UCLA. The quarterback's coach is now going to be the offensive coordinator at UCLA. But other than that, unless other news happens, all the other coordinators are staying. They've signed multi-year contracts. I mean, are you shocked to see this at a program like Indiana? And do you think that it's because of the NIL and the big to media rights deal and all that kind of stuff that's giving them this chance? Or like, if not, then they would have never had this shot.
So it does not surprise me
Mm-hmm.
for 3 main reasons. Number one, yes, the media rights deal means that Indiana is making more money through TV revenue than everybody in the country that's not in the Big Ten. So that's not total revenue, but that's the largest portion of revenue comes through the television deal. So Indiana, Rutgers, Northwestern, et cetera, cannot complain about money. They're making a boatload of money through CBS, NBC, and Fox. So that's point number one. Point number two is that contract extensions, all of that mean nothing to me in regards to evaluating how long a coach is going to be at a program. Those things are extended. Anytime anybody has a decent season, and obviously he's had a great season, they get a contract extension. And how many schools had to kick themselves because they gave somebody an extension based on one good year? Florida State, Mike Norvell. One good year, he had 2. But
Mel
anyway,
Tucker.
Mel Tucker,
Mel
perfect
Tucker.
example. Mel Tucker, 1 year, and then suddenly, just because the coach has one good year, he's got to get it. Some of these years, now Mel Tucker's was pretty strong year, top 10, won a New Year's Six bowl, etc. But sometimes these breakthrough years are nothing that outstanding the coach gets extended, and because they want to show the recruits that they're committed to this coach, and then they get burned and they're on the hook for a long buyout. On the other hand, yeah, the coaches sometimes get the extension, but they're able to parlay a good run of seasons into a different job. And even though they have a contract, they still leave, and that gets bought out from the school that hired them. Now, some people are conjecturing that we're going to see less of that going forward because of how much money needs to be committed to NIL, that these schools can't be just writing checks for $35 and $40 million at the drop of a hat, because they can't look the same boosters in the face that are the financial resource for their NIL collective and say, oh, we screwed up, hired a coach who went 5-7 2 years in a row. Now we fired him and we owe him $40 million. Pony up. Well, plus we need to get this quarterback out of the transfer portal and get a left tackle and a cornerback and a such and such. And we need another 15 million for that. That's going to cause these athletic directors to be a little bit more reserved with just doling out these contract extensions. So maybe Indiana's in a little different position because they just felt like Cignetti could parlay one season into a bigger job because it was just so startling what he accomplished this year. So again, number one, because of a TV contract. Number two, because contracts get extended all the time. That didn't surprise me. But number three, what doesn't surprise me is because Cignetti's such a strong personality that I could have foreseen that he went into Indiana and said, hey, I want you to show me that you're going to be, this is a guy that's not, this is not Kenny Dillingham at 32 years old, who's probably just dying to get a head coaching job anywhere, especially in the Power 5. Bam, he does a nice job at Florida State, Oregon, back-to-back years, and boom, he parlays that right into a big-time job. Where Cignetti's been around a long time. The dude's in his early 60s, I believe, 61, 62 years old, something like that. 64 years old. So I guess on one hand, he's looking at, I want to break into the big time and run my own program at a high level, and I've set myself up well at James Madison. But at the same time, he can say, you know what? I'm not leaving James Madison for just to get kicked around the Big Ten. I want to see commitment out of you. You need to promise and show me that facilities are going to be what they need to be, that you're going to give me money to retain my staff, NIL, and all of that. And then especially when he came through this year with 11-1, went back to them and probably said, let's keep it coming. So knowing his personality, putting that together with what he could demand coming off a great run at James Madison, that's why it doesn't surprise me that he most likely, even before he got the job originally, demanded those things, demanded that commitment. And then once he pulled through with 11-1, he had even more leverage to demand more commitment.
Absolutely. And I agree. It is very risky to, after one season, give a guy a massive extension. I mean, like you said with Mike Norvell, Mel Tucker, Jimbo Fisher still is just an all-time fail at Texas A&M. But the thing with me, like with Mel Tucker, he's one that stands out because he didn't really do that much, right? Like you had the one season he had at Colorado that he didn't win, and then he goes to Michigan State and he doesn't really win. It gets Kenneth Walker in the portal, has the 1 year, and then he gets this massive extension. The difference with that and Cignetti is that Curt Cignetti has won wherever he's been, everywhere that he's been. I know they're low levels, but James Madison and Elon and IUP, all those places he won. And then he was an assistant under Saban in the late 2000s. That's a plus as well. And then, goes to Indiana, has this great season right off the bat. Do I expect Indiana to be as good next year, record, wise? No, absolutely not. I don't see him going 11-1 next year. But to me, when I look at Indiana, I could see them being like in the Louisville predicament this year, right? Where Louisville had a better record last year and they were in the conversation, for the ACC title. This year they were not, but they were basically the same team. Louisville was still a solid team. Maybe last year they might have been slightly better, but Louisville went 8-4 this year and, had a tougher schedule. I can see Indiana doing the same thing, like next year going like 8-4 or something like that. And they, people are saying have fallen off a cliff. Oh, they're way worse this year. Last year was fraudulent. And I'm like, really? I mean, if Indiana, having road games at Penn State or having road games at Oregon next year, a couple tough, I think they have Iowa, Wisconsin, like you could go 8-4 and it could basically be the same team. You're just as good as you were last year, but your record's worse. And I don't think that would mean that like Cignetti, it was a fluke and that he didn't deserve the contract. I think the biggest thing for me and why Michigan State really shouldn't have given Mel Tucker that extension is because of what he did in the past wasn't impressive, one. And number two, I could be wrong, and definitely, Mark, tell me if I am, but I don't really believe that Mel Tucker was a big candidate for other jobs after that 1 year at Michigan State. I could be wrong. I don't remember. But I don't really think that he was. Everybody in the country was already saying we want Cignetti. Oklahoma, if Venables got fired, Florida State, if Norvell got fired, people at USC were talking about him, Riley's not going anywhere. Florida was talking about him before Napier started winning. Tons of places. Like, you had tons of people, even Michigan fans. Like, Sharon Moore is terrible. He's no good. We want Cignetti. Like, everybody was wanting him, supposedly. And you didn't see that with Tucker. And plus, Michigan State is a program that has, won before. D'Antonio was very consistent. They made the playoff the 1 year. I mean, they've had success in the past. They probably could have gone another year or two without giving Tucker anything, and they would have kept him just fine. With Indiana, you can't let him get away, because if you do let him get away, you're going to probably go back to being garbage again, and no one's going to – and your shot's done. Like, your one chance at winning consistently as a program is done. That's why, like – even though some people are like, oh, like Indiana should have held out. Like, it's funny that the same people saying that Indiana, has to give Cignetti the extension or he's going to go to another program are the same people saying that Indiana gave him the extension too early. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't even make sense. They had to give him the extension, in my opinion, or maybe he could have left and then Indiana's window would have been gone. So I think it was absolutely justified that they gave it to him, unlike other teams that have done it. And I agree with you 110%. Like, the media rights deal definitely helped. Like, Indiana, if they don't have that they're not even able to pay him that much and pay these assistants and even get some of these transfers and some of these players that they're even in, the running for. So even though money does ruin a lot of things and it has not helped college football in a lot of ways with realignment and other reasons, it definitely seems like it has helped Indiana, which seemed at the moment was like the most unlikeliest suspect to be helped, but it has. So that's been good.
Absolutely, sir. I am right there with you. It should be interesting to see if they compete with Notre Dame. Of course, you're going to have to put up with a lot of backlash, and they will too if they don't compete in that game. But as long as they put up a fight, I got to think that will justify they don't have to justify themselves. Number one, their season justifies them going to the playoff. But of course, playing a close game against Notre Dame is going to confirm that they were a selection that belonged, but we will see. Somebody's going to get blown out in this playoff. You got to think.
Could be SMU. It could be Clemson. It could be Indiana. You never know. It could even be Tennessee. Like, you never know. Tennessee could get blown out by Ohio State. I don't see Ohio State getting blown out. But you never know. Like, any of these teams could. I hope they're all good games. And hopefully Indiana just competes. Because, I mean, it'd be great if they won, because then that'd be like the TCU thing. Like, everybody was like, oh, TCU didn't belong. They didn't deserve to be in. Then they beat Michigan, and people are like, yes, they did. They were really good. Whatever. And then they got absolutely blown out by Georgia. So, I mean, I still, that was the biggest whiplash I've ever seen in my life. You had TCU getting that big win. People said they belonged, and then they got Mack truck. I do have to answer this from being here. I am over the age of 18. I will say that. So, appreciate it, though. Appreciate everybody for being here tonight. Appreciate you for coming on, Mark. Hopefully, Indiana will do good. We still have another week before to talk about IU next week on Tuesday night before that game, and see what happens with that, but definitely appreciate you for coming on. But yes, check out the Indiana channel. There's the link right there. Indiana at the voice of college football. We're trying to get subs over to the Indiana channel. We're at 64 subs right now. If you enjoyed watching, the show tonight, you're not going to want to miss future shows on the Indiana channel. And the link is right there for you to go check it out.
Exactly. So everything that just happened tonight, Jeffrey does that every Tuesday night, the same time. So everybody that's in the chat right now, having a good time talking college football, mixing it up with Jeffrey, you can do that every Tuesday. Just follow the link to the Indiana channel and keep this bookmarked for the Indiana channel every Tuesday night. It's at 7 o'clock Eastern time. All right?
Absolutely. I put it in there again. Like, there's the link. I know Indiana hasn't been relevant in the past. They haven't been a team no one's cared about except me coming on to talk about them. But they're in the playoff. They're 11-1. Like, there's never been more of a reason to talk about Indiana football than there is now. And
there you go. 2024 Sun Bowl champs every Tuesday. Oh, boy. Exactly. Every Tuesday. Right there. We got the link. It's in the chat. Follow it over to the Indiana channel. Be looking out for the for those of you who are subscribed here at the Voice of College Football on the main channel, or I assume you all found the show, so you must be in contact with us here on the main channel. I post a channel schedule every morning, so it's right there every Tuesday morning where you see that the Indiana show is going to be on at 7 o'clock Eastern time. But the easy way to do it, there you go, Realistic. Subscribe right now. Thank you for doing that. The easy way to do that is just go over to the Indiana channel right now. And guess what? If you flip over to the Indiana channel right now, you're going to see the exact same thing because we're simulcasting. So you're going to see Jeffrey and I talking right in real time. So you might as well just head over there right now. And Realistic, we appreciate you subscribing and everybody else as well. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Mark. It was a blast. Definitely appreciate everybody for watching the show and hope you guys check out Indiana, the voice of college football. And thanks, Jackson, again for the super chats tonight and for promoting the shows like he always does. Jackson is the links master, like I always said. He's got them all. I mean, if he doesn't have the link, it doesn't exist. He's got them all. It's crazy.
He is buttoned up. No doubt about that. He knows his college football, and he knows our network better than I do.
Which is unbelievable. I mean, that is amazing. Absolutely. But, again, appreciate everybody for being here. And we will have, before we go, the advertisement for the Voice of College Football bets.
College football is even more exciting with some action on the line. And the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now.